There's a very strange story of contradiction, maybe even cover-up, developing in Boston. Either emergency responders discovered a rundown apartment filled with drugs, sex toys, a dead overdosed transgender person, and several other trans guys hiding a room full of children crying for help, or none of that happened, actually, and it was all just a big misunderstanding. Depending on whether you believe the fire department or the police department, both of whom responded to this call last weekend. And even though Boston police are now denying the core of the story as of Thursday, the way it was presented publicly, even beforehand, was already very euphemistic, seeming to soften or recharacterize some crucial details. Last Saturday, June 17th, emergency responders received a call from a South Boston public housing apartment about an unconscious person in need of medical attention. Initial reports say they found a black trans woman, as in a biological man, dead on the floor, or very close to dead. Either way, this person died at the scene. So apparently our national genocide against trans women of color continues, but actually, the dead body may not have even been the worst thing in this apartment. Early reports said this apartment was in a state of uncleanliness or unsanitary conditions, something of a hoarding situation, according to one city councilor. But it wasn't just messy in general, like the tenant hadn't been keeping up with his chores or something. This was a certain kind of mess. There were lots of sex toys and drug paraphernalia all over the place, says a city councilor after speaking with first responders. So it sounds like it was a particular type of party with a particular type of mess. Indeed, the death was preliminarily ruled an overdose, and the body was taken to the medical examiner's office. When I say a particular type of party, I don't just mean the drugs. I mean the attendees and the attire, because this was an apartment full of transgender people and/or drag queens. The fire department's report says there were 6 adults inside, I believe including the dead person, who appeared to be males. Men dressed as women, but biologically male. So apparently these weren't convincingly passing presentations, but the Adam's apples and the stubble weren't the only things that they failed to conceal. According to first responders, upon assessing the scene, a firefighter heard a child calling for help from an adjacent room, which prompted the discovery of 4 young kids ages 5 through 10, a discovery made against the efforts of many of these partygoers.
One of the firefighters heard what they thought was a child's voice calling for help.
Murphy says some of the partygoers tried stopping a firefighter from finding the kids in another room of the apartment on Saturday morning.
And when he opened the door, he saw 4 children and what I believe are 2 adults in the back room. And it was really disturbing to him. And they just seemed scared.
And according to the initial report, there wasn't just physical obstruction from finding these children. There was denial, too. The men in the apartment were uncooperative and denied having children in the home until those children were discovered, at which point a man wearing a wig claimed to be the father of the kids. So the story quickly changed from "there are no kids here" to "okay, there are kids here, but they're my kids, and my cross-dressing friend was just helping them with their chemistry homework," when it all went horribly wrong. Apparently that was not particularly convincing either, because firefighters then filed a report with the State Department of Children and Families, and DCF then took custody of the kids, according to the governor. The incident remains under investigation. The city council will visit the issue at their meeting next week, but before they do, the story has now taken yet another bizarre twist. Now police are saying that almost everything you just heard was all just a big misunderstanding, maybe even a lie, actually. This according to a statement the police department released on Thursday evening. Police now say their detectives arrived at the scene after emergency responders, and actually, all the fabulously dressed partygoers were fully cooperative. Sure, there were 4 kids there, but they all had a parent present. And the police and those parents mutually agreed it would be best for the kids to stay in the other room, away from the dead body. And yes, because of the nature of the call, police too informed the Department of Children and Families, but Initial claims that drugs or other concerning materials were strewn about the home are not supported by what Boston police officers encountered or by any information they received at the scene. And even this statement was presented euphemistically. Police clarified the circumstances, several headlines read, instead of police completely contradict and change the story entirely. You decide who they're trying to protect. So the fire department and EMS personnel just made it all up. That is the implied accusation here. And note all of the contradictions. There were no drugs. Okay, so then this person overdosed on what? Equality and inclusion or something? The children weren't hidden. Police made a mutual decision with parents about how best to shield them from the scene. Okay, so that cry for help that led to their discovery was just a lie, supposedly. And now there wasn't just one alleged parent of all of the kids. Now there were multiple parents of multiple kids, and that's a point that nobody saw fit to make with emergency responders for some reason, and a point that Boston police didn't even see fit to make themselves originally, actually, because Boston police are now even contradicting themselves. Bizarrely, the first Boston police report made no mention at all of children in the home. Subsequently, on Sunday, police revised that report to acknowledge there were children, and they filed their own report with the Department of Children and Families in addition to the fire departments. If all of these partygoers were so quick to acknowledge their parenthood, and then police worked together with them in the best interest of the children, as is now the police department's claim, if the children were prioritized at the scene, well, then the presence of children at the scene is a very odd detail to omit in the first telling of the story. And it's also the very first time that anything has ever gone wrong in this apartment, apparently. According to the Boston Housing Authority, and again, this is a publicly subsidized apartment, so understand, this isn't just a horror show of likely child abuse. This is a horror show of likely child abuse that you pay for. But according to the Housing Authority, there were no previous complaints or issues with the tenant in this apartment. Only one prior call earlier this year about a routine maintenance issue last month, actually. So just like the police department, the housing authority also says nothing to see here, at least for now. But that is not what some neighbors say. They say they've seen plenty. A neighbor speaking with a local reporter says she hasn't felt safe in the apartment complex for years. People popping the doors to come in, people hanging out and carrying on all hours of the night. It would be smart to have police come around more to keep things in check, she says. But let's say that the police department and the housing authority are actually being truthful here, that even if this apartment complex is sketchy, that in fact there were no complaints against this unit specifically. And since EMS and firefighters were first on the scene and police arrived later, that maybe there was some kind of cleanup effort, and maybe police did have a different experience at the scene than the first responders did. But even if all of that is true, well, as another villain once famously asked,
what difference at this point does it make?
The fact of the matter is, there were 4 very young children present with a dead, drug-overdosed body in some sort of sexually deviant environment. And for those reasons, everybody who investigated this scene filed a report with Child Protective Services, who then took custody of these kids. And whose kids even are they? We still don't know. Maybe multiple adults at the scene were parents? Maybe none were. And while it is true that there is a legal obligation in Massachusetts for any of these investigators to file a report with the Department of Children and Families if they merely even suspect child neglect or abuse, since the police department is now minimizing what happened here, they should explain what did they see that led them to suspect neglect or abuse. If it wasn't the drugs that were strewn about, as they now deny, because actually there were no drugs at all, if it wasn't the obstruction of these men dressed as women, as they now deny, because actually they were cooperative and helpful the whole time, then what was it that created the suspicion? Merely the presence of a dead body? It can't just be that. Children aren't taken into custody every other time there's a sudden death in a home, so it stands to reason that police are denying publicly what they're reporting to the state privately. But the truth is out there and available, and not just in the abstract theoretical sense, but in tangible, reviewable evidence. Because according to the police report, at least one of the officers responding was wearing a body camera. Curiously, on this report, not only were the children not mentioned at all, and the juvenile and child abuse boxes were not checked under event statistics, but neither was drugs, despite it being the scene of an overdose. And I understand there are considerations to make when releasing body cam video. The investigation is still ongoing. You don't want to compromise that. There are children's identities involved that ought to be concealed, but there are ways to accommodate these considerations while not just telling the public the truth, but showing the public the truth. It's probably even easier than we think, actually. Maybe all that sensitive information will come pre-censored, because you can't see any of it through the haze of the smoke and the maze of the dildos that some transphobe at the fire department just decided to make up for absolutely no reason at all. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Gab. That is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.